Hey YouTubers, Electric Adventures here with a quick response to Lawnboyspost1975. His question was, we collect consoles for nostalgia, but what does nostalgia mean for you? And it was along the lines of, he has several consoles that he never actually owned. So, how does that relate to how he's nostalgic about it? And I'm the same way. I have lots of consoles, and I will stick to the concept of consoles because my answer would be slightly different for retro computers. But when I was younger, one of my best friends had an Atari 2600. He was quite a few kilometres away from me, but I went to school with him, and that was my Atari 2600 experience. I never owned one myself. The closest I came to owning one was I entered one of the competitions where you got the paddle pop sticks and you had to match them up, and actually between me and him we thought we had a set of them, sent them off, and they reckoned one of them was not the correct one, so they sent us a cricket poster instead. Well, highly disappointed. Although I would take he would be less disappointed than me because he actually had one already, and he had Space Invaders and a few others, and it is that very one which is the bottom of the stack of the 2600s up there. Is his actual 2600, and as well as a large percentage of my 2600 games all came from him, and are the very ones that I used to play when I was younger. So also add to this our next door neighbours who were lucky enough that my father built our house in a new suburb, and it was quite a big house. He built it all himself, all the brickwork, and next door was a house that was even fancier than ours, and their kids got everything, quite literally everything. So I scrimped and saved, bought my own Lego space and got one of those things. One Christmas they got every single Lego space thing, as an example. And of course the well-to-do people, they got Intellivisions, not 2600s, because the Intellivision was more expensive at the time. And they had a television, but they were younger than me, and occasionally they called on me to babysit them, which was basically they're pretty much always in bed, and then I just had to sit there and wait for the parents to come home. So I played on the Intellivision. So that's where my love of Intellivision comes from, because I actually quite like playing those games because they were different from the Atari 2600. Later on, I worked at a video game store. Sold games, Game & Watches as well. I quite like Game & Watches, although I only own one now. I did own more, I don't know what's happened to them. And then the ColecoVision came on. Now I didn't buy one on launch because I still couldn't quite afford one. I wasn't being paid a lot of money. I sold a hell of a lot of them. In the end I did buy one and ended up collecting quite a few titles. I sold it at one stage because I got the ColecoVision expansion for the original Spectre videos, keeping one of the joysticks from the Coleco and selling the Coleco to somebody else with only one joystick. I kept all my games, although they have at some stage in the past, and I can't remember when I did this, I sold that Coleco expansion for the Spectre video along with my games. I found the manuals. I still have all the original manuals for my games, but I don't have my original games, so that's why I do actually collect a lot of Coleco, have a lot of fondness for the system. Although I knew it was similar to the Spectre video and MSX back in the day, I never knew how similar, and I didn't have the tools available, or maybe I might have started writing games for them sooner. So that's where the nostalgia from those comes from. Then you move into the next era of that is commonly the true 8-bit systems, and that's the Nintendo NES and the Sega Master System. Now with the Nintendo NES, other than maybe in a glass cupboard in a Myers store down here, I don't think I ever saw one when it was back in the day when it was released. But in that same store that I worked on at a later stage, we had the Sega Master System, and I used to love it. It was a great system. I used to play it in store. But to clarify here, I never owned one myself because I could never afford it, and why would I spend the money on it when I could play it at the store whenever I wanted? And I at the store was pretty much open 6 days a week anyway, so I could have as much fun as that. So I played a whole heap of Sega Master System games in the store there. And that's that generation. Now, wind forward a few years, I do a few other jobs, and then I actually end up opening a science fiction and fantasy store myself, because I did enjoy retail and that sort of thing. And as part of that, we had a very small section of video game consoles, mainly for people to play in the store, but we also sold titles. And those two main consoles that we had were the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And only the really early launch titles. So in store, I mean, it was my store, I bought for in the store a Sega Genesis and a Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo question is that one behind me. That's one of my original ones. But I didn't keep a lot of the games, because when I closed the store down was when my first child was being born. I needed money, so I was talked into selling off pretty much all the titles. And I have now, not that I remember this precisely, but my brother-in-law is actually the person who bought most of the titles and also the Sega Genesis that I had there. I really regretted selling the Sega Genesis, so not actually much later after I sold all that, it was probably within a year, I bought another Sega Genesis, which is the one I have now, and fairly similar titles to what I had, with a couple of noticeable differences. So I still am missing some titles, and I have finally figured out which Earthworm Jim I had. I had the Earthworm Jim for the Super Nintendo, because just last week I asked my brother-in-law whether he had Earthworm Jim and which system he had it on, and it was Super Nintendo. So he has said he will at some stage sell it to me. I'm actually wondering, I did forget to ask at the time, whether he's got my Secret of Mana as well. So we shall see. But anyway, really good question. And as I said, I've only answered it from the point of view of consoles, because I think my answer would be slightly different for the retro computers. And have an answer for a question for, so that was good. Thank you for watching. Comment, subscribe, and also check out Lawnboy's original question. And I'll catch you all later.